Hi everyone, I'm David Aragona, and this is the December 2nd edition of Horses to Watch, where I highlight some horses to follow and potentially bet back on the New York circuit while walking you through some of my trip handicapping process. This week on the show, we're going to take a look at three races from last week at Aqueduct, highlighting some of the stakes action that took place last week. There were a number of stakes races on that holiday weekend, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. I'm going to talk about two stakes races from the Friday card to kick things off, beginning with race 8 from Friday. That was the Grade 3 Comely for 3-year-old fillies going a mile and an eighth on the dirt. And I want to focus on a horse that I think is a trip that a lot of people saw because there was trouble right in front of the stands at the start. And we can break these horses from the gate. And we're going to focus on the number 8, Gale. She was a horse that was projected to be on the early lead in this race, given how much speed she had shown in her prior starts. But you see coming out of the gate, she takes a first step that's okay, then she stumbles pretty badly on the second step, and right here she's a good 3 lengths behind the rest of the field. That's just not the kind of situation you want to be in when you're supposed to be a speed horse. And here Jose Ortiz is just kind of between a rock and a hard place. Do you try to get able to settle at the back of the pack? Well, you can see that's not really working out because he's got a pretty strong hold on this blinkered filly, and she's trying to run up on horse's heels. He wheels her to the outside here around the clubhouse turn, and she just rushes up. Now the pace is not very fast. You see the first quarter going up in 24-1. The pace throughout this race is pretty moderate, and that helps the number 6 Mrs. Danvers, who is the eventual winner of this race. But that said, even given the moderate pace, you don't want to be rushing up into the first quarter like Gale was. And now moving down the backstretch, she's 3 wide, and she is a filly. If you look at her PPs, she had really done her best running when she's free running on the lead, especially in her one other dirt start. So this is unfamiliar territory for her. And here moving into the far turn, matters become a little bit worse because she's still tugging and still eager, and Jose Ortiz now just drops his hands, and he lets her make this slightly premature move up to challenge Mrs. Danvers coming around the far turn. And she's going to get on terms with that filly as they move past the 5/16th pole coming to the quarter pole. But Mrs. Danvers had such an easy trip doing things so easily, setting the lead on the front end, and Gale just can't quite get to her. And you see Jose Ortiz kind of looking around here. He knows he's not getting by this front runner. He's looking at who's coming from behind. And from this point on, Gale's just kind of out of gas, and he's going to basically ease her up a little bit, give her a couple smacks with the stick, but he's really not pressuring her to finish this race. And here he's just going to let her drop back. She eventually finishes 5th here, beaten about 15 lengths. Now, that's a pretty large margin of defeat, but given the trip, I'm going to be forgiving of her. And keep in mind, this is a filly who had just made one prior dirt start. She had won that race against inferior competition by 13 lengths at Laurel, got an 86 buyer that day. And in this race, even though she was beaten a long way by Mrs. Danvers, her buyer only regressed by 7 points to a 79. And given that trip, I think she ran just as well as she had in her blowout win in her prior start. And also, I'm not totally convinced that a 2-turn mile and an eighth is really what this filly wants. She ultimately may be best going around 1 turn, given how much natural tactical speed she has. So she definitely deserves another shot. I don't think we've seen the best of her yet, and I'd give her another chance in a stakes race moving forward. Next, we're going to take a look at the race that actually took place right after that Comely on Friday's card at Aqueduct. It was race 9, the Forever Together Stakes, going a mile and a 16th on the turf for the fillies and mares. And this is one where I think you have to make a distinction between races that feature slow paces and races that feature a race flow that favors horses towards the front end, because this race features a slow pace, but it is dominated by closers, and we're going to talk about why that is. And let's break these horses from the gate, and I want to focus on the number 10, Miss Tehran. Now, towards the beginning of this race, things go okay for her. I mean, she broke maybe a half step slowly, but in a turf race, especially a turf route, that's not really a big deal. And she gets over towards the back of the pack into about a 2 wide trip towards the tail end of the field. That's fine, but as you see towards the front end, these horses on the lead are going to start to back down the pace quite a bit, and it's going to create a situation where a lot of the riders in behind have to start grabbing, and the field's really going to compress. And what occurs here is that it's going to be tough for horses coming from off the pace, not just because the pace is slowing down, but because the field is going to get so congested. There's going to be a lot of traffic issues for horses to deal with, and you're going to have to get your horse in a position where they're able to make a clear run when it really matters. And let's look at the major players in this race towards the back of the pack. Now, the eventual winner is the number 4, Feel Glorious, and I want you to watch her in relation to the number 10, Miss Tehran, who's the horse that I really want to focus on. The big favorite in the race is the number 12, Tap It Today. She's also slightly off the pace, running in 4th here. Now, the two horses on the front end, Chaleur and Platinum Painter. They're more long shot types in this race, especially the number 11 Platinum Painter, but they're still going to be involved in the finish because they're part of such a slow pace here. And now as they're coming around the far turn, let's move to the back of the pack again and look at those two horses they're going to be closing, the number 4 Feel Glorious and the number 10 Miss Tehran. Now Feel Glorious is spinning to the outside, her rider's trying to get her into the clear, and Miss Tehran, she's trying to follow her, but her rider's not really making an effort to tip her out. He's keeping her in behind horses here, and that's going to create a problem because these leaders have not created any separation, and you've just got this crush of horses in front of the number 10 now, whereas Feel Glorious was able to get to the outside. She's making that clear run, and now when Miss Tehran is hitting her best stride, her rider has to duck in between horses, angle her inside, lose momentum, where that's just not the way you want a closer to be ridden through the stretch, because they typically gain momentum when they get outside of horses, as the eventual winner Feel Glorious did. Now, Miss Tehran, this was just her second start in the United States, her second start off a near 2-year layoff prior to coming into Chad Brown's barn. She only made a couple of starts as a 2-year-old in France all the way back in 2018. Now, she lost her U.S. debut at Monmouth. She also had a somewhat tough trip that day when beating her stablemate Orglande, who came back to win a stakes race at Del Mar last weekend. So this is a filly who twice now in this country I think has run better than it appears, even though she's lost a couple times. And assuming that Chad Brown keeps her in training because she's so lightly raced at this point and she shows up in some stakes races at Gulfstream, I think she's one that could still take a big step forward as just a 4-year-old filly who's lightly raced. Let's now move on to Sunday's card and take a look at a maiden race. This was one for 2-year-olds going 6.5 furlongs on the dirt. And I do want to focus on another Chad Brown trainee. This filly is actually a first-time starter, the number 3 Precipitate. And we can break these horses from the starting gate. And Precipitate, she breaks fine, maybe just a half step slowly. That's not really a big deal for a first-time starter. You expect a little bit of greenness, but her rider, pumps a little bit on her coming out of the gate, and she actually has a little bit of speed in here, and she rushes up between horses to challenge the number 4 Miss Brazil for the lead and gets on terms with her briefly. Now, the early pace of this race, it's legitimate, and Miss Brazil, who is the eventual winner of this race, she is setting some pretty taxing fractions on the front end, and you're going to see that's going to take its toll on the rest of the field. Now, Precipitate's a good neck to half length behind her now on the inside as they're moving down the backstretch. And this is a difficult trip for an inexperienced first-time starter to be a little bit behind and in tight quarters on the inside. Some horses get intimidated in that position. You're going to see that's exactly what happens to Precipitate here. Is now she's dropping back a little bit. She's about 3/4 of length behind this leader, now a length behind, and horses are ranging up outside of her. Suddenly she gets put in tight quarters here, and she's just going to react badly to it. You see how here she's hesitating. She bounces off the horse to the inside, to the outside. She might have even hit the rail briefly, and she just loses all momentum, is now out of the race. And most horses in this position, after experiencing some adversity like that, they would just throw in the towel and be done running altogether. But her rider gives her a tap of the whip here, and she actually gets re-engaged, and she's going to close on this horse who's in third right now and actually finishing a dead heat for third place here. She's not done running and is running on well through the wire and gallops out okay in this race. And while she's beaten a good 10 lengths at the end, keep in mind, this was a very fast race for the level. The winner, Miss Brazil, got a 93 buyer, which is extremely high for a 2-year-old filly. The runner-up, Caramel Swirl, she was a big favorite in this race. She got an 87 buyer, finishing second. She had been beaten by the eventual tempted winner, Malathot, in her debut at Belmont with a tough trip. So she's one that looks like she could be bound for stakes in the future when she eventually breaks her maiden. So this is a pretty strong maiden race for Aqueduct, and Precipitate definitely has a pedigree to suggest that she has more to give in the future. She's by Pioneer of the Nile. She's a homebred by Juddmonte. Her dam is a half-sister to their champion mare Close Hatches. So the sky's the limit for this filly when she figures things out and gets a cleaner trip, and I think we'll see a much better performance from her in the future. Well, those are all the horses to watch for this week. Remember, you can always add these horses to your DRF watch mail. That's how I like to track these horses moving forward. You can access that on DRF.com, add these horses to a list, and get email notifications when they run back in the future. It makes things convenient when you're trying to highlight some horses that you want to bet back in future weeks and months. Well, thanks for tuning in this week to Horses to Watch, and stay tuned every Wednesday for more of these episodes in the future.